Hello, Blackhawks fans, and welcome to another edition of the Four Feathers podcast. It's a Monday Hawks happy hour here at about 6 o'clock on a Monday evening. I'm Ron Luce, joined by El Prez, Mr. Tony Marchese. Tony, before we dive into all the Hawks talk we have on deck for today, how are you doing, sir?
Doing fantastic, Ronald. I will crack them.
Oh, baby.
In this Hawks happy hour. How are you, man?
I am good. I will twist them in this Hawks happy hour because although I am drinking Gatorade, there might be other things in the Gatorade. So, Hawks happy hour. We're still participating.
There you go. You're staying hydrated and dehydrating at the same time. That's a hell of a move there. It's a pro move.
It is a pro
Hawks
move,
happy hour,
especially on a Monday. Tony, you gotta be pro move. And speaking of being a pro, Tony, for all those that listen to the Four Feathers podcast that want to join the conversation with us live, be a pro and go and subscribe to our YouTube channel over at OnTap Sportsnet. You can also like the Facebook page as well to get in on the conversation. Yes, you can still watch us on Twitter at Four Feathers Pod. But again, you want to get involved in the comments, come join us over on the YouTubes and then hit that little bell button so you know when we go live. Like, rate, review, you know the drill. We appreciate you guys over here at Four Feathers Podcast. Tony, we have a hell of a rundown here to go through this evening.
We do.
Lots to talk about in the world of Blackhawks hockey. So let's start it off with probably the biggest news that actually directly impacts the Blackhawks roster, and that was the 2-year contract extension for one Andreas Athanasiou. It is a 2-year deal. It's $425 is the annual average value over those 2 years. Solid move, very well noted in some of the articles that were written, especially from The Athletic and guys like Scott Powers, who are very close to the team, stating how his locker room presence was something that I think a lot of people really just didn't know about. Truthfully, I don't think it was really talked a whole lot about last season. Obviously, he brings plenty of speed to the table as well. And Tony, I don't know about you. Definitely want to get your thoughts just on the signing as well. But makes me think there was a reason that he wasn't traded at the deadline just a few months ago. Your thoughts on the 2-year deal for one Andreas Athanasiou?
First and foremost, the Blackhawks, when they made this signing, they wanted to make sure that they signed the guy that I cannot pronounce his last name because, cool, as the title of the episode says, you came up with this. I did not. 2 more years of Tony's tongue tangles. I'm sure you're living this one up because I'm going to butcher his name for 2 more years. But I like the signing, Ron. I like the signing. And some of the reasons as to why you just sort of highlighted. I mean, here's a guy that now it's sort of come out that he's been a leadership presence within the team. You're going to need some of that with the departures of Patrick Kane, Jonathan Taves, and that whole era sort of being closed. I think he's a nice bridge piece. A lot of us have looked at a guy like Max Domi potentially to have been that bridge piece, but he was in fact moved. Still want him back. He was in fact moved, but Athanasiou, as you've got it there in the in your name, it's helping me out, Ron. It's helping me out, so thank you. He's going to be here to kind of bridge that gap through this entire thing. And now he wasn't really a jump off the paper at you type player last year. At certain times, he was able to get the job done. But then there's other parts of his game that I think you want some more from. But I think for the value that you're getting here, 4.25. That's a pretty good contract. It's not long-term. He's going to help fill some of that cap space that GM Ron loves. I know you love it because we've got to spend some money. I think when you go out and look at the free agent market, this deal makes some sense and it supports some of the other things we're going to talk about here. I mean, you had talked about investing in Connor Bedard in an article that came out over at OnTap Sportsnet, I believe about a week ago, Ron. And this is another guy to sort of add to that. I don't think he's a top 6 forward on a very competitive club. However, with the Blackhawks still going through this rebuild, he's going to get top 6 minutes. And he's going to be used in a role where he is going to be potentially on one of your top 2 lines, I would think, Ron, going into the season. We'll see how the rest of everything shakes out. But it gives him a chance to sort of continue to prove himself here in Chicago, make a name for himself somewhat longer term than what we had originally expected.
Agreed, Tone. And I think what went really under the radar with Athanasiou was, earlier in the season, I think there was a lot of time spent where he was a little more buried in the lineup, or maybe just the players he was playing with weren't necessarily fitting to his strengths. And one of the guys we saw him really kind of groove with, especially late in the season, there was Lucas Reichel. They played really well together on that top line. They had a lot of chemistry. And as a result, Andreas Athanasiou had a really good run down the stretch for the Chicago Blackhawks last season. Worth noting as well, Tony, since he became, we'll call him a regular NHLer as of 2015-16, he played 37 games that season with the Detroit Red Wings. Outside of the outlier season in 2018-19, where he had 30 goals and 54 total points, last season was his best statistical season as a pro. 20 goals. That was the most, excluding that 30 goal season, since he had 18 all the way back in 16-17. And then Tony finished that up with the 20 assists. Even the year he had 30 goals, he only had 24 assists. So becoming more of a playmaker on this Blackhawks team too down the stretch. We saw his assist numbers really start to creep up later in the year. Like you said, it's a perfect move for where they're at right now. It helps you get closer to that cap floor. They still have about almost $16 million they have to spend to get there. They're just short of that. And then on top of it, he's still young enough where his best hockey might still be in front of him. Only 28 years old. I think that's something that goes very kind of understated just because of how long he's been around. So I love the move. I think it's a perfect move for everybody. Like you said, not a ton of term. It's not going to handicap them from a cap space perspective. When you expect this team to be competitive in, say, 3 years from now, when they're really going for it and they're really starting to add with the purpose of being a competitive franchise.
Do you think he could be a role
Again,
player in 3 years, Ron? Do you think he can be a type of guy that you bring back on another 2-year deal potentially and slot him into that bottom six because he's been here and he's made a name for himself? Because I think that's
so.
sort of what they're angling for with this.
Yeah, and I think so too. And I think a big part of his game, Tony, that I think a lot of people maybe don't necessarily think about right away is his speed. He is a speedster. If you've watched enough Blackhawks hockey, even when he was back in Detroit, when he was in LA, he's a speedster. He gets up and down the ice very quickly. Luke Richardson likes guys that go balls to the walls and have that speed. It fits Luke Richardson's system. And I think that's another reason why this feels like such a good fit for the Hawks, is because of that speed element that he brings to the table. You factor in the presumed number one pick. We only got to say that a little bit longer, but the presumed number one pick in Connor Bedard, Lucas Reichel, who's got some wheels on him. This is going to be a fast top six, I think, from the Blackhawks this season. And I think they are going to give some teams some fits despite being still a rebuilding club in 2023-2024.
I mean, they were still giving teams fits as a rebuilding club last season under Luke Richardson. I would imagine that he had a lot of good things to say about Andreas Athanasiou over the past season, and that's one of the reasons he's back here on a 2-year deal.
100%. Completely agree with you there, Tone. I'm proud of you, though. I'm glad the phonetic sounding out of his name is helping you here, buddy.
I've been working very hard, and if you just continue to give me the visual clues, we will get there.
Hey, it's easy. It's F-N-S-E-U. It's a bunch of A-E-I-O-U's for Mr. Athanasiou. Quickly to the comments.
I'd like to buy a vowel, though, real quick first.
By a quick vowel, indeed. Our friend Skokes in the comments. Dudes, what's up, sir? Good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Tone, let's continue pacing this conversation a little bit, because you mentioned investing in the presumed number one pick, which is Connor Bedard for the Chicago Blackhawks. Andreas Athanasiou certainly feels like a move that will help that, especially for him as a rookie. They might not play every single game together on the same line. However, definitely a guy that will probably get some power play tick with a guy like Connor Bedard in this coming season. But speaking of Bedard, this past weekend was the NHL's combine for all the incoming rookies. And Bedard stood out. Not only did he dominate the numbers on all the tests and everything like that, there is a picture out there from Charlie Remiliotis of him just standing next to another, 18-year-old prospect. He is jacked for a 18-year-old player. Like, he is unreal. And it's not even so much the arms, right? There were some guys that got some good guns, they're fit. The dude's got like Sidney Crosby tree trunks for legs. which is insanity. And it makes a lot of sense now as to why A, he dominated so much at the junior level, but then B, you know, it also makes sense to why he's so fast and why he's able to do what he does on the ice. And Tony, I wanted to bring this up not only for the reason of obviously to hype up what is expected to be the newest Blackhawk here in about 2 weeks, but I think back to like Patrick Kane's rookie year, right? When he came into the league and he was this undersized player and he was really small and he looked like an 18-year-old, right? Like he looked like a kid. Still came in, obviously had a great season, won the Calder Trophy, 72 points as a rookie. But it's so crazy to see the difference between some of these guys that when they come into the league, like Connor Bedard physically looks like a grown ass man as an 18-year-old.
He does. And Ron, I don't know how much of the combine materials you've soaked in, but I got a fair share of it from the twitter.com, and everything that anybody was writing about this guy was just all about what a physical specimen he is. The fact that I think he, wound up with 14 pull-ups, which beat everybody by and large. Thanks Ben Pope for that little bit of information the other day. Seeing his standing vertical and just his horizontal jump, I think he hit 5'9" on it and some change, and he wanted to hit 5'10". Just unreal stuff that you've got from Connor Bedard. And we talked about this on the last show. The Hawks are going to have their prospect camp off ice in the gym. He already looks like he doesn't need that at all. I can't imagine after the Blackhawks training staff gets their hands on him, what type of shape he's going to be in going into the NHL season next year, because he might be one of the most in shape kids, because he's still a kid, in the NHL. Even when you add in the men that are already there, that's scary. It's scary to think about.
Yeah, it's definitely scary for the rest of the league. I think it's exciting for the Blackhawks because, I think the Hawks were spoiled for a long time having such an Iron Man physically on the roster in Duncan Keith for all those years, a guy that could play the big minutes and seemingly never got tired. And not to say that Bedard's going to step in and play 30 minutes a night as a forward. That's just unrealistic. But
you never know.
It will be imperative, I think, because we've seen where when players struggle to have the right program off the ice to keep their body healthy and strong, it impacts them on the ice because they're on the ice less. Injuries pile up, plenty of that we've seen just over the NHL in the last decade and a half. I think if nothing else, I think this excites the Blackhawks and probably the fans as well, because this is a guy that clearly has already got a good idea of how to take care of his body as a young player. You already noted, once the Blackhawks training staff, which is renowned as one of the best strength programs, I think, in the NHL, get their hands on him, you have to think this is going to be a guy that's going to be in the best shape he can physically be in. And you hope, knocking on the wood right here that I'm sitting on, that helps limit injuries for a player like Bedard over the course of his NHL career. So was certainly something to take in and see. Any other thoughts, Tone, on the combine over the weekend before we continue our discussion here?
I mean, we could talk about Connor Bedard for a full hour, and I don't think that we'd have, to take a pause here. This is going to be incredible for the Blackhawks. Can't wait for draft day. It's getting close, Ron. I'm going to be down there doing some content live from Nashville. That is the plan. And yeah, I'm excited. I'm stoked for this. And I can't wait to see him don the Indian head sweater for the first time.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's going to be exciting in reminding everybody, if you're not already, at Four Feathers Pod on Twitter, at Tony on Tap on Twitter, be following along with both pages the week of the draft. Going to be plenty to take in and see from a content perspective. We'll have some shows as well. I will still be back here in HQ Chicago, holding down the fort as Tony has some fun in the Music City. Be sure to boo and flip off some Mustard Cat fans for me, because I hate those sons of bitches.
Can't wait.
I am looking forward to that for you, sir. And speaking of cats, we just had the conversation about the dreaded Mustard Cats, but how about another former Hawk? And just kind of watching the story unfold. Wrote an article, got a lot of backlash. Not surprised, because fans on Twitter like to read your tagline and not read the actual article. If you are one of those people, I'm sorry, it was meant for you. I don't mean
Educate yourself.
Educate yourself. All right. Just because I tweet a question doesn't mean you already know my answer. Nonetheless, the big key is, where is DeBrincat going in this offseason? Obviously, I think a lot of Blackhawks fans would be excited to see a player like Alex DeBrincat return in some capacity. However,
you would, despite tricking everybody, I think, Ron, for a second. I'm just going to break this right here and not beat around the bush. You would like to see Alex DeBrincat back in Chicago. What scared me about that was the rumors that had a longtime Chicago rival, the Detroit Red Wings, listed here. I don't like that one bit.
Yeah, I think that's one that's going to make people very salty if that's where he ends up. Unfortunately, I think a lot of people might not know this, but he is actually from the Detroit area initially. I think that was why that connection to the quote unquote rumors makes sense. However, in the same breath, both of your cup finalists were also reported interested teams in both Vegas and Florida. Florida, probably a lot more cap flexibility of the two. Vegas is going to very much be a team, especially if they win. We all know here in Chicago what happens after teams win cups. Cap casualties are a real thing. Vegas is going to have a hell of an offseason, having to unload a couple of contracts in order to stay competitive and try and run it back, assuming they take care of business on Tuesday night with a 3-1 lead right now in this Florida series. But yeah, Tone, like you said, Detroit, a finalist reportedly as well. Again, he is a restricted free agent, so his rights are still owned by the Ottawa Senators. The reason that a lot of people speculate he won't get a contract in Ottawa is because he wanted to know what was going on with the ownership situation before signing anywhere long-term, more specifically in Ottawa. Obviously, that is very much up in the air. There was reports at one point that Ryan Reynolds was interested in buying the Ottawa Senators, or at least being a part of a group to purchase the team. That has seemingly fallen through. So I think that uncertainty with the ownership group in Ottawa is what is ultimately going to drive DeBrincat to go elsewhere. So realistically, if teams want him, they're going to have to trade for his rights, or they're going to have to do the dreaded offer sheet, which then...
You don't think he's coming back to Chicago, though?
I do not. And the only reason I think that is because I don't think Davidson is going to be willing to depart with the assets that are going to be asked for, because I think Ottawa is probably going to ask for a first round pick for his rights. I don't think they're going to get that. I think ultimately they might get a second round pick for his rights.
But you think he's moved on draft day?
I think he's moved around draft week, I will say, because I don't think teams want to let him get to open free agency, because there will be some team that's ballsy enough that will sign him to an offer sheet. I think the days of playing nice and not signing guys to offer sheets are going to go away. Just because I think, the NHL is just...
We've had our fair share of offer sheet handed to Blackhawks players before in the past.
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of other teams have gotten lucky in those situations.
Yeah.
Not the Hawks in certain aspects. Glad it worked out when it did, but
100%. And I think we think back to kind of the dilemma that occurred just a handful of years ago, where the Montreal Canadiens extended an offer sheet to Sebastian Aho, and Carolina, because Carolina's owner was considered kind of a cheap ass, Canadiens said, hey, either you're matching them or we get a really good player. We'll give you the draft compensation.
Mm-hmm.
They matched him, only to turn around about a year later and do that to Jesperi Kotkaniemi and sign him for more than the Canadiens were willing to bring him back for, just for one season, literally just to pry him away. And then they signed him to a long-term deal at a very respectable number. I believe he makes about $4.25 per season over, I believe it was a 6-year contract. So offer sheets, a lot of people don't like to do them, and you've seen why, because it can come back and bite you in the ass if you misfire and you piss somebody off. But I think ultimately somebody's going to trade for his rights and then subsequently give him that contract he wants. I think he's going to want a long-term deal. I mean, he is young enough where if I was Kyle Davidson, I can make the justification for it. I think it's more what it would take to acquire his rights is what is going to keep Kyle Davidson from wanting to try to pull that off. But could you imagine if he gets
Ron's saying this is not going to happen?
But could you imagine in a world where like that last second round pick that they have, that I believe is probably coming from the Stars, that they got for Domi, if I'm remembering correctly. Let me do a quick confirmation here. A hashtag confirm. I'm sorry. It'll be the Rangers pick. That'll be the latest of those second round draft picks that they got. But could you imagine if they took that really late second round pick and said, hey, Ottawa, do you want this? and if they were like, yes, we'll take that, and they subsequently gave him a contract, you essentially flipped second rounders, and you really still got a free second rounder out of it, because that was from a subsequent or a different trade. You got Kevin Korchinski out of it. You got a third rounder. Oh, and you got DeBrincat back. You pulled the old switcheroo and got him back and keep him long term. I think that would be comical, to say the least. I just don't think it's going to happen. So, but it's still going to be fascinating, I think, to see, because he is just one of a few players. This is going to be a very active offseason.
It is.
I think a lot of people are looking at the free agency market tone and saying, well, it's kind of an underwhelming free agency class, which is a true statement. However, because of the cap not increasing by more than $1 million this season, there are going to be a lot of teams offloading players via trades. I think this year is going to be the year of the trade, and it's going to be a chaotic offseason. And as you know, GM Ron, I live for that shit. So I cannot wait. And the Brinkett story certainly, I think, will be one that we follow, just because of the connection, and I think still being a fan of the player, right? It's very easy to follow guys that you fall in love with when they're with your team.
Yes.
There's still plenty of guys around the league that I keep an eye on here and there that are no longer Blackhawks, but certainly guys
I'm sure
that
we're still going to be paying attention to Patrick Kane and Jonathan Taves, whatever happens in their respective camps. I know it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with Kane, especially after the surgery and where he winds up. But I wouldn't be surprised to see somebody sign him somewhat early when free agency opens.
Yeah. Agreed with
that. Said, I wouldn't put it past that to drag into the season already starting and Kane remaining unsigned. So a lot of storylines from former Hawks.
Yes, it will be a busy one at that. And it'll certainly be one that we are chasing and keeping an eye on, Tony. But speaking of things that are being chased, one thing Kyle Davidson will not be chasing this offseason is another goaltender, per his own mouth. It seems that the team is very content with what they have in their goaltending room. For those that maybe aren't entirely certain as to what that looks like right now, Masterton finalist Alex Stalock, not under contract going into next season, will likely probably sign somewhere else. Hopefully he does get a shot somewhere else, even if it isn't a backup role. He was a legend for the Hawks, coming off of a huge scare with the I believe it was the heart condition that he had, missed the entire COVID year. Would love to see him get the Masterton Award. I think that would be super cool, and B, to see him get another opportunity, maybe with a competitive team, a team that's going to go for a title next season. So that leaves the Hawks at the NHL level with Peter Mrazek, aka the best tank goalie of all time, and the youngster Arvid Soderblom. Sorry, I pulled my Chris Foster's. I apologize. And then your AHL group will be Jackson Stauber and the newly signed Drew Commesso, who I believe will be the number one in Rockford. I really think are believing he is the goalie of the future for the Chicago Blackhawks team. He and Soderblom in the future would make a really nice 1-2 down the road. And
who did
young
you
goalies
mention there,
too.
Commesso?
Yes, Mr. Okay. Commesso. Yep. So that's what it's going to look like.
I liked what I saw from Jackson Stauber last year. I'm sorry to cut you off here, but I liked what I saw from Stauber last year, Ron. And Mrazek's obviously the odd goalie out of those three when it comes to where they're at. And I think it's fine that the Hawks are not chasing a goalie this season. That said, you can never have enough goalie talent on your depth charts. We've seen this for the past couple of seasons, and we've even seen it for as long as you've watched hockey. Just because you have a solid number one doesn't mean that number two, number three, and even number four are equally as important down the stretch because of injuries, because of just goalies losing it. It's sort of like watching a starting pitcher just sort of fall off, Ron, if you want to bring it back over to baseball for just a second. I know we're both in the middle of some really interesting baseball seasons over on Sox on Tap and Cubs on Tap, so I had to slide that in there. But I think what would happen over the next season, just early predictions, you will see one of these younger goaltenders jump Mrazek for the number one spot on the depth chart here. I think that would be a marketed improvement going into not this season, but next season, seeing which one of these guys can start to take the reins a little bit, because you're going to have to, at some point, know which one of these guys is going to take the greatest strides. So I expect all three of the younger names, or at least the AHL names, to come up and get some time in net in this next season.
Yeah, and Tony, on top of that, right? I think injuries are inevitable, right? We've
Yes.
seen it year over year with this Hawks team. They're going to need to be deep. I think we are going to probably get a crack at every single one of those three names that you mentioned outside of Mrazek. I think we'll obviously Soderblom Bloom will be taking share with the net early in the year. He'll get the first opportunity of the group. Kamesa will be your probably your number one everyday starter down in Rockford, if I had a guess. But nope, nothing says we can't see him at some point this season. And even Sauber, to your point, Tone, was not bad in the limited amount of time that we actually did see him put up some really nice performances at times as well. So, and to your point, Tony, I want to bring something up. You mentioned goalie depth, and you can't have enough of it. Completely agree. Look at the team that might be crowned Stanley Cup champions in 24 or a little over 24 hours. The Vegas Golden Knights are on their fourth goalie. And really, if you think about it, they're on their fifth goalie because Robin Lehner's on LTIR with everything going on with him. Jonathan Quick, then they acquired. He's hurt. Logan Thompson had a good run. He's hurt. Laurent Brassard, he's gotten hurt. And now Aiden Hill has helped carry them all the way to the Stanley Cup. Goalie depth is important, and I agree with you. It will be, something to keep an eye on as a Hawks fan because there is a very good shot that we see all four of these guys at one point or another over the course of an 82-game season next season.
Now, is there a chance, Ron, that you think that Kyle Davidson just doesn't want to show his hand with these statements? I'm a big tinfoil hat guy. Putting my tinfoil hat on here, Ron, do you think that there is an opportunity for the Hawks with as many draft picks as they do to either go out there, draft a goalie in this draft, somewhat higher than we projected a goalie to go, that they maybe take some stock in here? Somebody that maybe has to, remain overseas or might take a little bit longer to develop in the pipeline, but that they really like and think can, help this team, or go the opposite route. You talk about trades. I don't know what the trade market right now looks like for goalies overall. I haven't really looked at that yet. But is there a chance that maybe this is Kyle Davidson just using the leverage that he has with a microphone at the moment to say, we're not chasing this at all. We like what we have here, and then go flip the script and wind up with a better goaltender than, say, Peter Mrazek to start this next season?
Yeah, I think in a perfect world, there's absolutely an opportunity for that, truthfully. I think, there's been rumblings that I have been told via secondhand. I don't know how true or not true they obviously are. But supposedly, if you, again, believe everything you read, Marc-Andre Fleury has expressed interest in becoming a Blackhawk again at some point. He is still under contract for another season with the Minnesota Wild. He's going to make $3.5 million.
Will he play forever?
Shit.
It is the question.
If he keeps doing what he's doing, he might. But it'll remains to be seen kind of what's going to happen up in Minnesota with Philip Gustafson and now Hunter Jones, who came up and played really well for them. Will they invest their stock there and maybe try to move on from a guy like Marc-Andre Fleury in order to create a little extra cap space? Who knows? But I think what it allows him to do, Tony, in reference to Kyle Davidson, is if he does stand put with the goaltenders that he has, there's no pressure of like, well, you told us you were going to go look for somebody. And then it's effectively, you can only go up from here, right? You can do whatever you want. Then you've established the baseline of saying, we are content with the four that we have. And anything that they add from here is just gravy on top. I think there is a world because of the number of the draft picks they have that in maybe the second or third round, we could see them take a goaltender. And then, like you said, even if it's a guy that maybe has to stay overseas or even in the CHL for a few seasons, I think there's a world where we see that and they allow somebody to kind of muster. Because again, just like, throwing it back to baseballs, starting pitchers take longer to develop. Goaltenders are the same way in hockey. You can never have enough of them. I think if they were to invest with one of those third round picks in a goalie and let him just take his time and develop at whatever level it is that he's going to play, I think that's not a bad move. And worst case scenario, maybe there's a move, like you said, with trades where a team really does want to dump a contract and the Hawks say, hey, you know what? It's a 1-year deal. we'll take that. We'll take that and we'll run with it and we'll see what happens. So I think there's plenty of opportunities, but I really wouldn't be shocked if they stand pat because I think Davidson likes Soderboom and Comesso, and I think they really want to see what they have with those two
Yep.
while maybe investing in depth down the road versus trying to go out and get like an established vet or somebody like that right now. Although we saw them again take on a bad contract last season with a guy like Anton Khudobin. So I think something like that could certainly happen again this year as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's something that you mentioned during this conversation about not setting the expectations of we're going to go out and try and find a goaltender here at this juncture does lend itself for this to work either way. I just wanted to, pick your brain on if you think that might have been just to do that and set themselves up for a nice little way that there's really no pressure here in case that's actually something that they might actively be trying to do.
Yeah, I think no pressure is a good way to look at it. I think it allows them to just say, "Hey, look, this is the group that we have right now. You got one more year of Mrazek at that $3.8 million. Again, he's a good tank goalie. You give yourself an opportunity to still have a quality draft pick next season while watching development with other parts of your organization. I think if Soderblom comes in and has a really strong year, that'll be absolutely encouraging because he's still very young, and I think people forget how young he truly is still. And I think guys like Drew Comesso are the same way. I think everybody wants to see Comesso have a dominant season in Rockford and really start to kind of develop into a really good goaltender. He had a really good last year at BU. I think he can build on that in the AHL. And again, depth, you can never have enough of it. Jackson Sauber showed he can come up in a pinch and deliver at least quality minutes in the net when this team's going to potentially need him. So I think they like what they have. I think, they're content with what they have. But I always think there's opportunity to either acquire another guy or just, bring in another guy, depending on the circumstances that occur over the course of the offseason.
Fair enough there, Ron. I don't have much else to add on the goalie situation. I actually was looking at the rundown here, and we've got some names that you're about to read out in terms of Blackhawks RFAs. And I'm excited for this because I want to rapid fire through some of these and just do the reaction game, Ron. So I'll turn it over to you on that.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So for those that are kind of wondering, well, what else are you guys going to possibly talk about right now? Obviously, the draft is on the horizon. My Christmas morning is coming up very quickly, which is July 1st, which is when NHL free agency opens, and it is the official start of the new league year. But Tony, there are some names. The UFA group for this Blackhawks team, obviously a little less underwhelming. Jujar Khaira, Andreas Englund are probably the two underwhelming names. Will both likely not be back with the team next season. Obviously, we already know the fate of the captain, Mr. Jonathan Taves. Those are the UFAs. That's it. And then Alex Stalock, who I think at this point we have contently said he will be moving on and probably be somewhere else in 2023-24. So that leaves the RFAs. And there are 5 RFAs that the Blackhawks have coming into this off season. And Tony, I just want to run rapid fire through each one of them. I want to get your thoughts on kind of the season that they had. Some of these guys were not with the team very long at the end of the year as well. And then I want to know what you think. Will they be back with the squad, or will they be, let go of, or maybe even their rights traded in a potential scenario in the draft where maybe the Blackhawks can move up and they can send the rights to another team so they have an opportunity to sign them. So we're just going to go through rapid fire, and we're going to start with perhaps my favorite of the group. I'll tip my bias here early and often. And very quickly, Tony, thoughts on Anders Bjork going into next season?
I love Bjork. He's great. Ron, I love him as well. He's actually won me some bets on anytime goal scorers a couple times. We got real close on one as well at a game that we were, I believe, at together. I think he's back. I think he's going to be as our guy over on Sox on Tap. I know he's one of your favorites at On Tap Sportsnet. NWI Steve says, I think the Bjork will be #back.
I like that tone. And again, just adding to your argument here, I agree. I think Anders Bjork is a guy they should give a shot to because came in, had a really nice little run at the end of the season, fell out of favor in Buffalo, wasn't getting a ton of ice time, played one single NHL game in 2022-23, played 42 games, down with the AHL club there with the Rochester Americans for the Sabres. Comes to Chicago, 8 points in 13 games. Very respectable numbers. Was playing kind of in that middle six for most of the year. Wasn't getting top line minutes. Wasn't really seen much on the power play, but still producing at 5-on-5. I think he's a guy still incredibly young as well. Only 26 years of age. I think this is a guy they absolutely should give a shot to. He's not going to cost you much. Again, RFAs can be tendered. They're not. They'll cost you under $1 million in most cases. I think Anders Bjork is one that the Blackhawks should consider bringing back. So I'm glad we are in agreement on that one. But Tony, the next name, I think a name that I think I know where your head's at, but maybe you'll surprise me. And it is one Philip Kurashev. What do you think he will be? What is his future with this team? And what did you think of him last season?
I think he's hashtag back as well, Ron. I think Kurashev is a name that he's been in this lineup long enough and sort of just molded himself here, where you've heard his name enough on a broadcast. You know who Philip Kurashev is and what he can potentially develop into. That said, I don't really know if we're going to be disappointed long-term in Philip Kurashev. We've seen a handful of these guys since we started Four Feathers, Ron, who've come through the Blackhawks system, not really made it much farther there. I mean, I still remember doing 40s for Forsling. Kurashev sort of reminds me of that same type of player where it's just not going to all get put together. There's flashes. I think the organization likes him. They've put enough into him at this point, Ron, where I think he's probably back. But I wouldn't doubt it if they move on from him as well on the other end of this and just said, okay, we're done with this. I'm curious more of what you have to say about Kurashev, because I think he's sort of one of those just very middle of the road guys right now.
Yeah, that's fair. And before we get to him, our friend Mr. Skokes here in the comments brings up Kurashev as well. So I want to share his thought. He says, I think Kurashev can develop into a quality middle six guy for the Blackhawks. He says similar to a Fro-League type that can play both center and wing. And I am actually going to echo what Skokes said, and I think he is also hashtag back. I think Philip Kurashev is a very misunderstood player in the Blackhawks organization right now. And the reason I say that is he has been such a dynamic player. And he was very sheltered early on. He was rushed to the NHL. I know people are probably having PTSD because we've said that countless times on this podcast. Yeah. Prospects getting rushed. Philip Kurashev is only 23 years old. I think a lot of people don't realize that. He's really young. He still has tons of room to grow. And I think what Kurashev brings to this organization that, a lot of people might not see. I mean, he's played at least 54 games now since that 2021 season when he first made his appearance as a 21-year-old.
And here's the thing, though, Ron. This is where I want to just sort of justify what I'm saying. He's not the guy that's going to jump off the stat sheet for you at all.
Agreed. But I think because of what he brings to the table, he's the perfect type of player. Because to me, Kurashev is the perfect type of player that can play up and down the lineup. Remember having those guys during the Cup runs, the Andrew Shaws, the Brandon Sods, that no matter where they slotted, they made an impact on the ice. I think Kurashev can be that kind of player. I don't think he's ever going to give you a 60, 70 point season, but I think in a very good year, he could give you 40 to 45 points, playing anywhere from your third line to your top line, depending on what kind of shuffling they do with the team. He plays the style that I think Luke Richardson likes. We saw his ice time dramatically increase as the season last year continued to wear on.
We did, but they also got rid of a bunch of people too, Ron. So
sure.
I take that into account here.
Even before they got rid of Kane and those guys, his ice time was still ticking upward before the trades. Obviously,
as it should be, though, in his development track, he should be starting to take on more minutes. But
exactly,
it's nice to see him earn that. And yes, I do agree with it, that he'll be back. And I think we both echo each other's sentiment on this. I'm just cautious with him.
Sure.
I'm just cautious with him because you don't really know, with the state of the team last season, you don't really know if Philip Kurashev is going to be a guy that can play on a top-level hockey team and actually make an impact. Or was he a benefactor of, hey, you've got some minutes out there with some top end guys, and then at other points in time, you are on that third line that's not as effective as other lines within the Blackhawks unit. So I don't know. The jury's still out on him. He is young. There's a lot of room to develop. I'm just trying to be cautious with him. I don't know if he'll be here for the next Stanley Cup.
That's fair.
I'd like to see him there, but
sure. I think for the time being, definitely a guy I think they're going to at least invest in and give him an opportunity. Over the last 3 years, each year he's increased the number of games he's played. His goal totals, although dropping from year 1 to 2, he set a new career high this past year with 9 in 70 games and then 16 assists. His 25 points was a new career high for him. Obviously, playing lower in the lineup most often. But again, you still need bottom 6 guys. I think he's a guy that they're going to be happy to bring back. And I think he's a guy that is worth watching because, again, I think considering how old he is, he's another guy that people are going to want to keep an eye on. Tony, our next name on the list here after Mr. Philip Kurashev is Austin Wagner. I know, probably best known for my little bit during Blackhawks Four Feathers Tank Center, asking who he was and us wanting Alex Turcotte as the rumors were initially suggesting. However, came over for a player to be named later, just 25 years old. Didn't do a terrible amount with the team, only played 7 games with the Hawks last year, registered 1 goal and 1 assist. Tony, what say you about Austin Wagner?
He is the first not coming #back guy. I believe he is out into the free agent pool. I believe that Austin Wagner, who is best known for your internet bit on Four Feathers Tank Center, is just that. And that might be the highlight of Austin Wagner's career, Ron, is having the video that you made about Austin Wagner on the internet. That might be the most he ever does in the NHL. Again, I'm going to be totally proven wrong on this one, but I don't know, maybe too plain of a name. Maybe we've got too many plain name guys. Austin Wagner, very plain name. When you've got Anders Bjork and Philip Kurashev preceding you in the RFA list, that's just how you drew him up here, Ron. I'm not seeing it here. I feel like he was sort of collateral within a move over the on draft day or trade deadline day. And I just sort of think, if he is back, maybe, I don't know, can he sign a minor league deal? Or no, he can't. Is he on two-way?
He could be a two-way player. Yeah.
Maybe if he's a two-way guy.
Okay. I can see that.
Maybe if he's a two-way guy.
I agree. I think he will be returned with the expectation that if he does return, he is in Rockford to start the year. I think if nothing else, they see him maybe as depth because he can play center, he can play wing. Again, one of those guys that can play all 3 forward spots. They're good to have. I think there was a lot of disappointment.
There is better out there, though. I think that's what.
Sure,
you and I agree on this. They've got money to spend. They need to spend money. You know that Connor Bedard is probably going to be in one of those center positions.
Yes.
They should fill this roster out just a little bit better and be a little bit more competitive than they were last year. I don't know if Austin Wagner's the type of project that they need at this moment.
No, but I think if nothing else at this point in time, he's a good player to have down in Rockford. And that's why I think if he is coming back, it's in the AHL. He's there that if a ton of guys get hurt and you need a flexible forward to come up from the AHL, he's the type of candidate that can do that. If they don't see that role for him, I think that he truly was just a guy they took a flyer on at the trade deadline, said, let's see what we have in him. If he's a guy that we think there's something here for, we'll keep him around. If not, they let him walk. I think there's a good chance he's a 50-50 to me. If he stays around, it's with the intention that he's going to be in Rockford. Otherwise, I think he could walk. Again, just feel bad for the guy because the rumors and rumblings were initially that it was Alex Turcotte that the Hawks were talking to the Kings about, and then Wagner was the one that came back. So not a shot at him, but certainly I think underwhelming to say the least. He did show some of that up and down prowess, though, that Richardson likes in terms of the gritty speed game. So wouldn't be surprised if they keep him around with the idea that go play in Rockford, go develop. You are that first, one or two guys up in the event of an injury at the forward position. So I think that's where he could ultimately lie. Tony,
fair. I just think he's gone.
Fair. I absolutely think that's fair. Tony, let's transition now to the next position group here, which is the defenseman. 2 names that we will get to here. The first, maybe a little more known, a little less controversial, and this is Caleb Jones. Do you think Caleb Jones is back in Blackhawks, red and black and white next season?
I do. I do think that Caleb Jones is back, Ron. He's shown some flashes. Obviously, he's got family here. The relationship seems to have been fairly decent between the Joneses and the Blackhawks. So I think Caleb Jones is back. It might be a sweetheart deal because his brother is here and it's good for the family and he's done his job, so to speak. I don't see him getting large minutes down the road with the Chicago Blackhawks by any stretch of the imagination, but I could see Caleb Jones being back and sort of being another one of those guys, Ron, where maybe it is of the best interest that he floats back and forth. But if you can't do that, I don't know. Caleb Jones might be the victim of a roster crunch at some point. However, I think if there's a team out there that's going to sign him, I think the Blackhawks make a lot of sense for next season. It's been a decent storyline, I'm sure, for the Joneses thus far. But I think with his brother being on the team and the next name that we're about to talk about, it makes a little bit more sense for Caleb Jones to be back here. Thoughts from you?
Yeah, I think Caleb Jones is back with the caveat that he is back for one season and one season only. And the reason I say that is because there are a lot of left-handed defensemen coming through the Blackhawks pipeline in the next season or two. There's already a lot of thought in the Blackhawks community that Kevin Korchinski might make the team out of camp this year. Alex Vlasic will probably get an opportunity right away as well.
I'll put it this way, Ron. I'm going to rephrase this. I think he's tendered a contract. I don't think there's guarantees he makes the team.
Fair. I think if he does make the team, it's in like that seventh defenseman capacity where he's going to rotate in and out on the bottom pairing. He'll play more if there are injuries. If a guy like Jared Tenorti or somebody like that goes down, I think that's where you see Caleb Jones step in a little bit more. I think
if a guy like Jared Tenorti goes down, he's going down at some point, Ron, and it's going to be a brutal injury because that's who Jared Tenorti is. It's why you need the defenseman depth. And I think that he gets tendered a contract on that. But Tenorti's a warrior. Nothing but respect for that guy. Love him. Sorry, had to insert that.
Absolutely. I think Jones sticks around. I think it is with the intention he is kind of that seventh D-man. I think you'll still see plenty of him. I think Caleb Jones is still going to be a fairly household name in the 2023-24 season. I just think it is with that caveat that he's going to probably be considered the seventh guy on the roster, which again, you still need those guys. They're still important. And again, he probably won't cost a terrible amount of money. So they'll probably happily bring him back for all the same reasons you mentioned as well, Tony. But perhaps the most fascinating name, or maybe least fascinating name, depending on truly how you look at it, Ian Mitchell. Is he back in a Blackhawks sweater next season?
This is actually, in my opinion, Ron, one of the most fascinating names out of this group because I don't know about you, but I remember a certain time when Ian Mitchell's name was almost synonymous within Blackhawks circles as being the next number one D-man for the Chicago Blackhawks. A guy that I heard comps to Duncan Keith. I heard comps to just being that guy for the next generation of great Blackhawks. I don't know what went wrong here. I really don't know what went wrong. And there's a ton of it that did go wrong with Ian Mitchell. I don't know where it started. I don't know where it ends. But word on the street is Ian Mitchell doesn't want to be back here. And I'm pretty sure the Blackhawks probably don't want him back either. He is not coming back. Will he go on to another NHL franchise and do great things? Who knows? That's scary. It probably will happen. He could still probably develop into somebody great for someone else. I don't think it's going to happen here. I don't know if it was a playing time issue. I don't know if it was just didn't fit into the coaching systems. I don't know if Jeremy Colleton wrecked all the development that Ian Mitchell had with his coaching staff. No earthly idea. But Ian Mitchell and the Blackhawks are like oil and water, it seems, from what I've heard. Ron, you got any other comments on this one?
I do. I can tell you exactly where his development went wrong. A, he was beloved by one Stan Bowman. And B, just like every other prospect, he was rushed to the show. Again, this is just what it felt like. I don't think Ian Mitchell what is ever going to become the offensive defenseman that I think he was hyped up to be. I think he can still be a very serviceable defenseman at the NHL level. But again, another guy that I think a lot of people forget is only 24 years old. The problem is he was rushed. Most defensemen do take more than a year or two to get to the show. That is just the nature of the beast. Not every guy is Cale Makar or Miro Heiskanen.
What year was he drafted in?
Ian Mitchell was the Chicago host year in 2017.
Okay. So he was drafted in 2017. He made his debut in...
He made his debut in 2020-2021, which was
that's what I thought. It was
year.
The 2021 year. Mm-hmm. How long did he spend in Rockford? Let's just refresh this back for the listeners here and myself, because I'm trying to put this timeline together in terms of rushing him.
He came out of the University of Denver, and he spent 5 total games in Rockford in that 21 season, playing 39 games with the Blackhawks. The next year, he played 8 games with the Hawks in 21-22 with 57 games in Rockford. Had a very good run in Rockford as well, 35 points in 57 games.
So rushed to the NHL, and then we focused on development.
Correct.
Yep. Okay. Yep. That's
where it went wrong. And I think
that's the mark of the beast in most professional sports.
Yes. And I think for Ian Mitchell's sake, I think for the Blackhawks' sake, I think it is a parting of ways. A change of scenery for a player like him will be good. I just also don't think he fits right now with the Blackhawks because of the amount of defensive depth that they now have. He really truly was a Stanbo guy. I have a hunch that he was not a Kyle Davidson guy. And I wish him nothing but the best, but he will not be a Chicago Blackhawk come next season. I am in agreement with you there, Tony. Tony, before we start to get to any quick final thoughts here, what's on tap next? Well, as you mentioned earlier, Tony, the NHL draft is coming up. That starts on June 28th. That'll be round 1. That'll start at 6 o'clock Central Time on night 1. Obviously, the Blackhawks are the first team on the clock. We'll be keeping an eye out if they do decide to move up, down, left, or right from that number 19 pick that they also have in the first round, courtesy of the Tampa Bay Lightning in the Brandon Hagel trade. That will be on night 1. And then day 2 begins at 10 a.m. Central Time. Some of you might be eating your breakfast at that time. Some of you might be a few hours into your workday, whatever it might be.
Some might still be sleeping.
Some might still be sleeping. And that is when day 2 coverage will begin from Nashville. Again, 10 a.m. Central Time is when that'll start. Hawks right away with 4 second-round picks, assuming that doesn't change between now and the draft. So it'll be plenty busy, not only here at ontapsportsnet.com, but also on the draft floor and in the Blackhawks front office. And then, as I mentioned, free agency begins on July 1st, my Christmas morning. I can't wait. Tony, with all of that in mind, with where things are going, with where Four Feathers is heading, etc., any final thoughts for us before we get out of here?
Final thoughts, Ron, and I think we might have missed this one in the rundown, but that's okay. Chris Vosters has a new broadcast partner, and yes, I'm very excited to see how this shakes out. We spent a lot of time talking about the TV broadcast last season, what was right with it, what was wrong with it, and I think there's a name coming to this booth, and I'm interested to see your thoughts on this. How do you think that this is going to mold going forward? And what do you think that spells for Patrick Sharp's involvement with the Chicago Blackhawks in general moving forward?
Ooh, that's a spicy one. So I personally like the Darren Pang edition. Obviously has a connection to the Blackhawks, played for the team in the 80s. A very well-respected broadcast figure around the NHL and even internationally, has participated in Olympic broadcasts in his career as well. I think what it means, if nothing else, I think Patrick Sharp, you already saw him and Troy Murray splitting time last year, and it was more obvious than an elephant in a china shop that Troy Murray and Chris Vosters did not mesh well. I think the Murray-Whiteman combination is undefeated. It is the best product that they can give on the radio. Not to say that, Casey Chelios or anybody else that did radio fill-ins were not good. I think Chelios, she is fantastic. I thoroughly enjoy her. It's just something about the Troy Weideman connection that is spectacular. I think it might just be a case that maybe Patrick Sharp wanted a little bit more of a reduced role, like he wants to call games kind of just here and there. And when that's the case, Darren Pang is still going to observe and take care of his business with TNT. So any of those national games, we got very used to it with Eddie O in all of his years with the Blackhawks when his national duties came calling. I think we'll see something like that when it comes to Darren Pang, where you'll see more of maybe Casey Chelios gets some TV time, as well as Patrick Sharp, because one Colby Cohen also no longer doing broadcast with the Chicago Blackhawks, which was also
there's an opening there. There's an opening there, and I was wondering how this is all going to shake out. Does Patrick Sharp wind up back in studio? I know they talked about Scott Darling's role within the studio broadcast. You've got Colby Cohen now missing from there. Obviously, Andrew Shaw had that role for a while. He wasn't really around last season. There's an opening in the studio to do something, and there's two names that make some weird sense to move into the studio. Chris Chelios, obviously out of a contract right now. His daughter, the connections to the Blackhawks, already there. Be interesting to see if the Hawks pick Chris Chelios up to go work in the studio, or if Patrick Sharp sort of returns back, because didn't he do some work in studio just a couple of years prior, Ron?
I believe he did. I believe he did a little bit of studio work as well. And maybe it will be kind of a rotating...
Reduced travel for Sharp.
It does. And maybe that is kind of where they're going. Maybe it'll be a little more rotational, where you'll see a little bit Patrick Sharp in the studio. Maybe every once in a while you'll catch him in the booth with Vosters. You'll see Peng there most of the time, obviously. Maybe you'll see Chelios. Casey, she'll take a shot in the color commentator role as well. Maybe Chris does join and is a part of that rotation with Mr. Pat Boyle in the studio. We're obviously...
It will also be interesting, Ron. I want to throw this out there.
Yep.
With Jerry Reinsdorf acquiring Stadium, and the deal with NBC, I believe, runs through just the end of this season, correct?
I think so. I believe
with
so.
The Blackhawks, the White Sox, and the Chicago Bulls. It will be interesting to see what the Blackhawks TV product looks like after next season.
Yeah.
So just some food for thought.
Absolutely.
I don't think Pang was coming here for 1 year.
No. Not after spending a decade and a half in St. Louis as their color commentator. I think he is here for the long haul. It will be fascinating. I think, especially personally, as somebody who takes a lot of interest in the broadcasting because of what I like to do on the side as well with the broadcasting. It'll be certainly something I keep an eye on, and I'll be fascinated, honestly, to kind of watch what that becomes with the product, not only this coming season with still another year of NBC Sports Chicago, but then moving forward into the future, whether that's with Stadium under Jerry Reinsdorf and company with his two franchises that he owns, or if that's maybe they go a little different direction and try to slide over to Marquee Sports Network and join that network as well. Some options within the city of Chicago already with Chicago ties for the Blackhawks to do. It'll be interesting to see what happens. I think that's a great final thought there from you, Tony. Anything else that you want to add before we get out of here?
That's it, Ron. It's been an awesome Hawks happy hour. We just went about an hour, so yes, I loved it. Really excited for the future of the Chicago Blackhawks. Still very high on the Hawks, Ron. Excellent to share a microphone with you and talk about our beloved Blackhawks over the last little Hawks happy hour. I'm glad Andreas Athanasiou is back. I think I stuck the landing there. I'm happy with it.
Nice.
Ron, I'll toss it to you to read the promos and take us on home.
Absolutely. This was season 4, episode 22. 2 more years of Tony Tongue Tangles. It might not be 2 more years of Tony Tongue Tangles, though, as he has nailed Andreas Athanasiou's pronunciation. We thank everybody for joining us. Obviously, Four Feathers Podcast, the official Blackhawks content creation machine of the OnTap Sports Network. You can check out all of our other great work as well over at ontapsportsnet.com and at ontapsportsnet on social media. Bears, Bulls, Cubs, White Sox, you name it, everything in between. We take care of it for you over at OnTap Sports Network. check out On Tap Sports Network and check out what's on tap in Chicago sports. As you mentioned, Tony, this was the Hawks happy hour. We went just about an hour or two. How perfect is that? Next time you'll hear from us, we'll be getting amped up and ready for the NHL draft. As Tony mentioned, he will be in Nashville on site for that here in just a couple of weeks. And it's looking up, Hawks fans. And in agreement with you, Tony, I am also high on the Hawks, my friend. And with that in mind, what do you say? Let's go, Hawks.
Let's go, Hawks.